This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 6th of July 2024. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with the journalist and Monocle Radio regular politics commentator, Vincent McAviney. Then,
I'm not concerned because I think my art form speaks for itself and people love the tangible, tactile quality of stop motion. I'm probably more fearful for illustrators and computer animators who are already being replaced in some ways by AI.
Monocle's Gunnar Gronlid reflects on the future of the animation industry. And we'll be speaking to musician, author and artist Tayo Irvine Hendrix ahead of the debut of her Heartbeat art exhibition at Henley Festival. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First, here's the news. Iran's reformist candidate Masoud Pezeshkian has won a runoff presidential election against his ultra-conservative rival in a snap poll marked by low turnout. In his campaign, Pezeshkian promised to reach out to the West and ease enforcement on the country's mandatory headscarf law, though he said there would be no radical changes to Iran's Shiite theocracy. Efforts to secure a ceasefire and hostage release in Gaza gathered momentum on Friday after Hamas made a revised proposal on the terms of a deal, and Israel said negotiations would continue into next week. The plan entails gradually releasing hostages and Israeli forces pulling back over an initial 2 phases and the freeing of Palestinian prisoners. A third phase involves Gaza's reconstruction. And Hungary has cancelled a meeting for Monday in Budapest with Germany's foreign minister and her Hungarian counterpart, according to a German foreign ministry official, who said it was astonished and that a serious and honest discussion was needed after Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán met Russia's President Vladimir Putin on Friday. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm Georgina Godwin, and with me in the studio is my colleague, the journalist and Monocle Radio regular politics commentator, Vincent McAviney. Good morning to you, Vinny.
Good morning.
You're looking surprisingly awake and all right after what I know has been an extraordinary week for you and for most people here in Britain.
Yeah, I think I did my biggest marathon of broadcasting. I did 28 hours in the end. I was here with you on the Globalist Thursday and then didn't go to bed until around 11 a.m. yesterday morning. So it was quite a feat. So I did Channel 4, the UK domestic broadcaster, overnight from Jeremy Hunt's count, and also did international media as well for the likes of RTE and Radio New Zealand. So there's been huge global attention. This is, for anyone that doesn't know, the first change in a British government in 14 years. So this was a big moment, and it's on the front of pretty much all the papers this morning around the world in some mention or other.
So what we're talking about, of course, is Sir Keir Starmer, becoming the new British Prime Minister. He's head of the Labour Party. They won by an absolute landslide. What we're seeing now are 2 different things that I'm interested in discussing, Vinny. One is that the Tory party who lost are basically fighting like rats in a sack.
Yep.
There's a blame game going on, and it's extraordinary.
And it started the day before the election. Suella Braverman, one of the people on the right of the party, fired the starting gun then. Even before any votes were cast, she said, "We've lost it, we've messed everything up."
Yeah, extraordinary. Mad. And I just don't know how they'll come back from this. I think basically they're laying the way open for Nigel Farage of the Reform Party, which got 5 seats. It's his 8th time of trying to get into Parliament. He's in now, along with 4 of his
5
colleagues.
seats, but 4 million votes. For people that don't know the UK's voting system, we have a first-past-the-post system, which means, parties like Nigel Farage's can get 4 million votes and only get 4 MPs. The Liberal Democrats can get roughly the same number and get something like 60 MPs. It is a very unusual system that he yesterday declared needs to change.
And of course, we should point out that Farage is far right, although I'm sure most people know that, big supporter of Donald Trump. The other thing I want to look at is the fact that Keir Starmer has announced his cabinet, and what he's bringing in are experts, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. Famously, a few years ago, Michael Gove, who was a huge proponent of Brexit, said we've had enough of experts. We don't want them anymore because of all the experts that were saying Brexit is going to do all sorts of damage to the UK's economy, which, of course, then did come true. This is quite a move from Keir Starmer. In the UK, the way that the system works is your secretaries of state are sort of the top level of government underneath the prime minister. They each get charged with different things. So you might be the foreign secretary, you might be the home secretary, you might be justice secretary. Underneath them, they have a team of 4 to 5 ministers who look after separate areas of their portfolio. And what we've seen already this morning is Sir Patrick Vallance, who was the government's chief scientific advisor during the pandemic. He is very familiar to British people because he was on the daily press conferences very often. He has been put into the House of Lords so that he can become the Minister for Science. But also a chap called Timpson, who has a family company called Timpsons. He is very famous in his stores. They sort of are where you get keys cut, you can have shoes rehealed. They sort of do all sorts. And he has a really interesting approach to the way that he manages the company. It's all about an internal happiness index that he runs. He sort of has a soft hand. He lets the people who sort of run the franchises of the stores sort of do their own thing within certain parameters, but they have more independence than most others. But he does this thing where he employs people coming out of prisons. He trains them up and he gives them jobs, and he thinks it's important, not for sort of like category A crimes of murder or sexual abuse or anything like that, but he thinks it's important to try and reform prisoners. And he has been made this morning the Minister for Prisons, which is quite remarkable. So he's James Timpson. He's apparently been advising Labour in opposition, and we're told to expect that there might be more expertise coming in. Now, sometimes these can be stunts. David Cameron tried it. I remember he tried to bring in Mary Portas as like a high street czar. I'd never sort of got the idea of bringing in these czars. It didn't do anything. It was PR puff. Bringing someone actually into government as a minister is quite a big thing for the individuals themselves because they form part of the government, but it kind of brings what you'd hope is real expertise. And whereas in other countries, in America, for instance, a cabinet is very much, it's not politicians, it's not congressmen and senators, it's sort of people that you bring in that you think are experts in this and they can advise. That's not the sort of normal model we have here in Britain. So it's interesting that Keir Starmer wants that. He wants that. Everything that you'll hear from him now is going to be all about delivery, stability, and serving the British public.
Public service, that whole take on it. His speech was really, really well done, I thought. But also what we're looking at very much here is his foreign policy. I know that Andrew Muller will be looking at that on the foreign desk, how Britain's new government will deal with foreign policy. And I also want to point you towards Meet the Writers, because I speak to the former senior civil servant Alan Evans, and he lifts the lid on the crucial but sometimes overlooked role of the private office in transitions in government.
Very important. And can I add a point about Keir Starmer as well, which is really interesting? He, when he was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, which is a big administration in the UK, it was a big job that he had. You run all the public prosecutions. He got to attend something that no Prime Minister has got to go to before, which is the cabinet. So we have the cabinet of the government. The next day, the cabinet of the top civil servants in each department, the permanent secretaries, get together and meet. And they go through what the government's discussed the previous day and say, oh, well, we can do that. That's nonsense. Let's put that on the long grass. We can maybe pull this lever and do this. Keir Starmer got to go to that when he was head of the CPS. So he has seen behind the government machinery, behind the curtain. And I think that is something that maybe some civil servants might be a little bit scared about, these sort of, permanent, very cloaked figures that have huge power, somewhat unchecked, people say, because they're not sort of, they're purposely very out of the limelight. But Keir Starmer will perhaps know more than predecessors, this is the civil service trying to slow this one down, what I want it to go, in the fast lane.
Today is all about elections. Let's look at another election that has also just happened. We've got the results now from Iran, and this is extraordinary. Masoud Pezeshkian, who is a moderate, sort of.
But in that Overton window,
has won.
Yes, really surprising result here. It is one of those incidences where it's, a sliding doors moment. No one expected this election is because, of course, the previous president died in that helicopter crash. And the fact that someone who, given the sort of tensions in the country, the way it's been going in recent years, someone on the opposite side, and of course there's been low turnout in these elections, the fact that he has got it is interesting. I mean, the caveats are that, he is apparently long held the Supreme leader, the Ayatollah, is the final arbiter of all state matters, and he is sort of, he's, as we're saying, he's not hard line, but he's still probably pretty hard line as to what we would view here from the West.
But very much open to discussing the West.
Yes.
He was kind of pro the nuclear deal and all the rest of it. So.
And a man of science as well. He was a former heart surgeon as well, which is, I think, interesting when you have a sort of this theocratic state.
Yeah. So hopefully some kind of sea change there, as we're seeing in Britain and as we might be about to see in France, because, of course, the runoff happens tomorrow.
And there's been all sorts of deals cut on the parties of the left to try and tactically provide voters options to try and stop the far right coming in. I mean, the indications are that they're doing pretty well. I will never understand why Emmanuel Macron decided this call right now. He could have done it later in the year. I think his theory was, and this is interesting, a few years ago when I was out reporting once with Nick Clegg, who's the Deputy Prime Minister, it was a local election here in the UK. It was about sort of 2013, 2014. And the British National Party was still a bit of a thing. And UKIP was on the rise. And what he said to me stuck with me, which is like, these far-right parties, what you've got to remember, they have mayfly political lives somewhat, because they come in and they're that busy sort of spouting all of their nonsense that they can't deliver. They don't know how to deliver. They're normally people that sort of don't have the kind of caliber of talent that you need to change things, or, and they run into issues that the things that they want just simply can't be done, or, they're sort of, trying to hold back the tide, essentially. And then by the next election cycle, you're gone. And you did see that in Britain with the BNP got in a bit in power in 2010. By 2015, they were all gone and stuff. Same with UKIP, 2015, massive amounts get in for a few years. Now they're pretty much all gone. And I can only imagine that Emmanuel Macron thought, well, if we let them in now, they'll not be able to do anything for 2 years. They'll infight. There'll be some scandals. They'll, ruin themselves, essentially. And then the next election, perhaps it stops Marine Le Pen from coming in as president. But at the same time, it's same call with Rishi Sunak. They had the power to decide this, but let down their own side, because it was their own side more than anyone who was surprised. When you're in opposition, you're constantly working every single day to be prepared for government. And so you're naturally more prepared. Whereas Emmanuel Macron's side, completely flummoxed by this. We'll see tomorrow, whether or not the French people that love, in all occasions when, I think in the early 2000s, when Marine Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, got through to the second round of the presidency, there was a bit of a shock around the nation, and all of a sudden the turnout had in the first round been low. In the second round, it came in strong to block him. Whether or not Marine Le Pen has done enough to sort of detoxify all the brand that it doesn't trigger the same alarm yet. But everything we've been hearing on Monocle in the past 2 weeks is that there has been a very somber mood in France about this turn of events.
Absolutely. And of course, you and I are working together on Monday morning. We'll be here on The Globalist. We'll be speaking to Catherine Fieschi and also the journalist Alexander Kushner. They're both in Paris, and they'll be giving us just exactly what's happened in the election and all the fallout from that.
From Monocle's new Paris bureau, we have to say, set up in time for the Olympics in 2 weeks' time, where we'll be doing lots of coverage too.
Absolutely. And just a quick look at what Biden's been doing, because, of course, this is an election that's on the horizon in November. But he gave a speech last night, and really it's not looking great for him.
Yeah, I mean, it was a sit-down interview on ABC News with George Stephanopoulos, who, of course, worked famously for Bill Clinton in the 1990s. So you might say a sort of maybe friendlier journalist, maybe a bit more receptive. He is a top-quality journalist, but it's not done much to alleviate fears. He obviously was a bit more compos mentis. He had a bit more vigour. He was blaming the debate formats on the fact that he was jet lagged from too much international travel. He'd had a cold. There has been just this bad narrative all week because they haven't been upfront with people. All of a sudden, halfway through the debate last week, they came out and said, Biden's got a cold. The team initially said that he wasn't seen by doctors after the debate, and that turned out not to be true, and they had to row that back. So it doesn't help that they're muddying the waters themselves by not being clear on what his condition is really like. And last night, an interview is very different to having to debate Donald Trump on live TV. The answer, though, that seems to be getting the most traction this morning, which has really raised alarm bells, is one when he was asked, how will you feel in January 2025 if you have to go to the inauguration of President Trump once again, if you've lost? And he said, well, as long as I feel like I've done my very best and I've given it my all. And I think for many Democrats, that's not going to cut it. When Joe Biden has painted it as an existential crisis moment for America, when you hear the details of the Project 2025, Trump's team and the things that they want to do, these huge sweeping changes. I mean, this word has been used too much in the past couple of years, but the handmaid's tale-ishness of that document, the Project 2025, would be a massive, it would be moving the US to being a sort of fundamental Christian evangelical nation. It would be removing rights from women, removing rights from, for birth control. All of that is in this document and much more. And I think that it was alarming. He has made it clear, though, he feels that unless the Lord Jesus Christ himself came down from the heavens, he would not be dropping out. But at the same time, he made a gaffe where he was doing a radio interview as well with a Philadelphia radio station where he described himself, not Kamala Harris, as the first black female president.
Oops. And imprecision in language is a thing that we are really quite interested in. So, for instance, I want you to listen to this. It's Alicia Silverstone as Cher Horowitz in Clueless.
But it's like when I had this garden party for my father's birthday, right? I said RSVP because it was a sit-down dinner. But people came that, did not RSVP. So I was, totally bugging.
What do you think of that, man?
It's so 90s. I remember in the 90s I went to, for a couple of years, an American school in Luxembourg, and obviously you're very young, your accent changes, but I did get that inflection of using a lot, and my parents were very keen to stamp that out. It is, it is so funny to hear that clip again, but also the fact it's really not gone away. Even though that sounds so 90s using all the time, it's come back with the Kardashians because they use it all the time, and it is slightly frustrating.
Well, it's all these little filler words, isn't it? But the Times has got a big article today. The headline is really? Academic says stop sneering at the word criticising the filler word interrupts thought and shows bias against young women. That's according to a professor of sociolinguistics. I find this absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, really fascinating. And judging people for the language that they use, perhaps not the best thing, and making assumptions about their intelligence. It's really interesting that there's some little tiny things that people just seem to go on a rant with the language. I mean, Amal Rajan, who's a famous radio presenter over here in the UK on the BBC, he went on a whole rant against people using the word Shakespearean this week. And I was like, I think that's a perfectly valid word. And he was sort of tearing it down, saying, well, what does it mean? Does it mean that you're like a tragedy like Othello, or you're a comedy like, As You Like It, or whatever? But I'm now using quite a lot, I realise.
Of course.
But I think we can all understand a word like that where it means they've been on a bit of a voyage and it's been quite dramatic.
Yeah.
And picking people apart for little things. And, going forward is the one that lots of people have an issue with. I've got no issue with it. If people want to use it, then
I'm finding an issue with, just particularly this week, we've been talking about historic or historical results in various countries, and of course those two mean different things. But I just want to point out there's a fantastic book by Lionel Shriver. It's her latest book. It's called Mania, and in this they have a thing called the mental parity movement, which is the last great civil rights fight where you're not allowed to call anybody stupid. And you, for instance, various people get cancelled, like the people on like the Crane brothers on Frasier.
Oh yes,
because they are brain vain.
Brain vain. Okay.
And so all sorts of terrible things happen because people who are not qualified are told, don't worry, darling, you've probably passed the exam anyway. So it's hilarious that and so this book very much talks to what this article is talking about.
I think it's about perceptions of intelligence. I don't know why in this conversation the woman that sprung to mind to me is actually, not to sort of bang on about British politics, Angela Rayner, Britain's new Deputy Prime Minister and Levelling Up Secretary. She's someone, who might be a bit on the world stage that people might come across. And I think she's someone that might surprise a lot of people. She left school at 16 with no qualifications and was pregnant from a very working class, poor part of Britain. She worked as a carer in her 20s and she was a grandmother by the time that she was 40. So she is someone who really, would be sneered at and mocked by British tabloids and looked down upon. She has proven herself to having, not gone to, even the sort of sixth form in the UK to go to university. She has proven herself to be one of the most adept political minds in Britain, has only, in 10 years gone from just becoming an MP to being the deputy prime minister of this country. And she was sneered at a lot in this country initially because she speaks pretty frankly. She speaks her mind. She's got a mind. And, sometimes she can be a bit coarse and politics is rough and tumble. But she is someone who I think will slightly impress people. But it's about judging people in their language. You shouldn't always do it. It's the wrong thing to do. And you can use like as much as you like.
Well, unfortunately, that means I don't have time to use some language that some people might not like me to use. This is a big article on penises, and it's in The Guardian if you want to read it. I'm particularly interested in the comparison between cucumbers, bananas and tofu.
They're on the rise in TV. Yeah.
Oh, indeed. Enough of this election talk. Right, next up on today's programme, we turn to the art of animation. After years of growth and a maturing selection of films on offer, mass layoffs and the threat of generative AI has left thousands of animation professionals sounding the alarm for the future of the industry. Well, to find out just how worried animation enthusiasts should be, Monocle's Gunnar Gronlid sought the opinions of award-winning directors Adam Elliot and James A. Castillo, known respectively for their mastery of stop motion and virtual reality filming.
In the media industries, people always love to spell the end. The end of radio, the end of print, the end of cinema, and now, the end of animation. On paper, the animation industry seems to be thriving. Audience appetites have grown by leaps and bounds since the pandemic, and analysts are projecting the global market to soar still higher in the next decade. And yet, many claim the industry is in a state of collapse. The economics of streaming are failing to bring in big revenues for major studios, with the likes of Disney, Paramount, and Sony laying off thousands of employees in their animation divisions. Stoking even greater terror is artificial intelligence, which many fear will cause the layoffs to snowball out of control until the very human artistry of the medium has been replaced almost entirely. Whenever panic like this starts hitting the headlines, it's worth taking a step back to see if things are really as gloomy as they seem. To gain some perspective, I spoke to two animation directors whose films land on the opposite ends of the spectrum in their reliance on new technologies.
Well, look, I never had a strong ambition to even be an animator. I actually wanted to be a veterinarian.
That's Adam Elliot, the Australian Oscar-winning stop-motion filmmaker behind celebrated films like Harvey Crumpet and Mary and Max. When Elliot went to film school and started studying animation in the 90s, he quickly rejected digital computer techniques in favour of an entirely handcrafted style of stop-motion claymation.
And I knew pretty quickly, because computer animation was evolving, that I did want to go down that path because I just don't like sitting in, and I still don't like sitting in front of a computer screen. I much prefer getting my hands dirty.
Elliot's films stray far from the child-friendly variety that usually dominates the animation box office. His creepy, cute aesthetic lulls viewers into very adult stories replete with death, drugs, and other content that would probably make most Disney animation executives run in the other direction. His latest creation, Memoirs of a Snail, has been received with celebration on the festival circuit ahead of its release in October. And though Elliot still wants as little digital intervention as possible in his filmmaking process, he's grateful for what advances like streaming have done to the accessibility of his films.
There's more variety, there's more choice, and so things that used to be more niche and boutique are suddenly becoming a bit more mainstream, and that's fantastic because my films have always been for a very small demographic, and they're low budget, they're independent, they're very auteur-based. But now, as the years have gone on, they are, reaching more and more people through digital technology, and that's great for us people who prefer to be control freaks and write and direct our own works. Yeah.
As Elliot points out, streaming has made it far easier for niche animated films to make it mainstream, even if they don't see the same revenues as the latest Pixar blockbuster.
Orange? Who made the console orange?
Do I look orange?
I didn't touch it.
Orange is not my color.
Not me.
Hello, everybody! Oh my gosh.
While the economics of streaming has become an irk for major studios that rely on those big box office returns, it has leveled the playing field with independent auteur filmmakers that operate with smaller budgets outside the old Hollywood sphere. And when it comes to AI, Elliot thinks the technology will ultimately make films like his all the more attractive to viewers.
Because of things like the advent of AI and the fear of AI, things that are handmade are suddenly getting a greater appreciation. I'm not concerned because I think my art form speaks for itself and people love the tangible, tactile quality of stop motion. I'm probably more fearful for illustrators and computer animators who are already being replaced in some ways by AI. So it's a scary future, but I think there's always going to be a respect for things that are handmade, hand-drawn, handcrafted. It's always been the case. I don't think that's going to go away.
So what about those filmmakers who have long embraced new computer methods in animation and who are suddenly seeing all their hard work threatened by artificial competitors?
My name is James A. Castillo. I'm an animation art director and writer.
James A. Castillo is the Spanish Emmy Award-winning director of the short film Madrid Noir, a love letter to his home city, which was made to be consumed not on a regular screen, but in virtual reality.
I had this idea that I wanted to make something much more akin to a theater play than a movie. Because I realized, as I was sort of seeing VR developing, I figured out that I think actually the language of theater translated much better into VR than film did. Because like in VR in theater, you inhabit the same space as the sets and the actors.
Similar to today's fears around AI, many in the film industry fear that VR would lead to the end of traditional filmmaking. Years later, those fears have pretty much died down, and the general consensus seems to be that virtual reality and traditional films can live quite happily alongside each other. It's a tale as old as the entertainment industry itself. With waves of new technology comes waves of layoffs, and people begin to fear that the industry will lose its human artistry and become nothing more than a machine churning out heartless content. But maybe Elliot and Castillo are right. Maybe the human touch will not only endure, but be strengthened and diversified as the Hollywood guard undermines its own ability to tell great stories by letting go of the artists that make it possible.
Thanks, Gunnar. That was Monocle's Gunnar Gronlid. You're listening to Monocle on Saturday. And finally on the programme, I'm speaking to the artist, musician and author Tayo Irvine Hendrix, whose Heartbeat art exhibition is making its UK debut at the Black Tie Henley Arts Festival. Launching in Stockholm, the Tayo Hendrix Heartbeat experience includes fine art, music and written work, engaging all five senses. Tayo, welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm fascinated by the idea of this experience, which appears to take place on so many different levels. It almost seems to defy description, but I'm going to ask you, please, to describe it.
It's very difficult to describe. I think you need to experience what is happening, but I'm going to do my best, Georgia. So the idea behind this is you have the artwork, but also the artwork is inspired very much by my spiritual journey. So I work very much with spirit, and that incorporates the music as well. So the art that we create, or that I create, is the painting vision, but it's also the spiritual connection to the artist, because I don't paint the ego of the artist. So I don't paint the celebrity that most people know. What I'm painting is the energy or the vibration of that person. And then what that encourages me to then do is it leads on to a piece of music or, you know, a piece of sculpture. So it tends to come in 3 or 4 different areas, and it's all to do with we create a sense of smell, sound. So it's all of the senses that you're tapping into as you walk into these events, and they are pretty magical. It's a whole experience. It's a unique experience.
It sounds so rich and textured. Of course, you have been a musician for many years, but the visual art came pretty recently.
The visual art came quite late, and it was because we'd created a children's book, and in the children's book there was lots of illustrations, and everybody assumed that I'd done those illustrations, but I hadn't. I'd worked on them, but I hadn't actually created all of them. So when a friend asked me to do some of the art, I decided to give it a shot, and the first art show that we did was in 2019. And that was the soft launch for Stockholm. And we've done about 4 or 5 there since. When we did the first show, it was fantastic. We sold, we sold 9 pieces within 56 minutes, which was unheard of for a solo artist who's just arrived on the scene. And it was fantastic to be part of that and just have that experience. For me, life is about experiencing things.
And this is all, your new exhibition is all designed to be viewed while listening to your album, April Love. Tell us about that.
So the work that we have here, the April Love, is for the John Lennon and the Yoko Ono piece of art itself. And it was about them having that April Love connection, the bed loving that they had and all of those things. So that specific piece of music was written for John. It came about from his working with me on the energy to create that piece. And so they'll be able to hear that at Henley. But there are different pieces for different pieces of art. April Love incorporated lots of the pieces, like for Jimmy's work and Taxi to Pimlico. That was very much about sort of a piece of art that's in Stockholm. So as you come along and you hear them and you see them, you immerse yourself in this, Georgia. It's a very different thing from just walking in and seeing something. And the reason that we're asking people, we have headphones there that people can listen to what they're, to what we've created. So again, they can have the whole experience.
It sounds...
And as they have that whole experience, then they'll take that away and remember that.
Absolutely. It sounds very memorable. You mentioned Henley. So before we go, if you just tell us about this boutique black tie festival.
Oh, it's going to be amazing. So the Boutique Black Tie Festival is going to be fun. I've not been to Henley before, to the festival, but it's a spectacular place. It's full of wild characters and it's full of people who think outside the box. And that's what we're looking for. We've got fantastic art that's going to be there. We've got a couple of sort of showpieces. We've got lots of limited editions that we're doing. I've got a couple of our friends are putting stuff in. We've got limited editions from King Charles. We've got limited editions from Banksy. So, we'll be showing with really good form. And I think that it's the sort of place that will go down very well for the art that we've done. A very black tie event, but don't tell them we're bringing rock and roll to Henley. Let's hope we can get in.
Fantastic. So that's the Boutique Black Tie Festival. It takes place over 5 days in Henley-on-Thames. It celebrates food, comedy and international music and arts. It includes children's entertainers too. And of course, the wonderful Tayo Hendrix, who I've just been speaking to. Thank you very much to you for coming on the show. That's all we have time for today on Monocle on Saturday. Many thanks to our producer and studio engineer, Mariella Bevan, with editing assistance from Steph Chungu. And once again, thanks to my guests, Vincent McAviney, Tayo Irvine Hendrix. Monocle on Saturday returns next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.